Shalom and welcome back to another class of A Journey Through the Bible. And we are studying the book of Samuel. And before we go into this next chapter, which is going to be chapters 21 and 22, I thought I would present to you this map. And this map is an amazing map which tells us a little bit about what we're going to encounter when we read through the stories of David in these next chapters. It's a very strange and sad story, actually, with David having to flee. Now, this map is a map of Israel, and you can see it's called David Eludes Saul, and it starts with number 1, the top, in a place called Ramah. And this is already a review of when David was running away from Saul. David was running away from Saul, and he runs away to Samuel in the Ramah. And from Samuel, he travels, and we're going to discuss that in the chapter today. But I just want to give you a sense of what's happening. David is one step ahead of Saul, and if he should ever, and we'll see, he actually does meet up with him in certain interesting condition. He's a step ahead of Saul. Saul makes it very clear he wants to kill David, and he tells all of his court. Therefore, David is running throughout the mainland, the high mountains or the mountain range of Judea, the lower Hebron hills. Even to if you see, he first goes to Nob, number 2. Then he goes west all the way to Gath, which we'll discuss. He actually goes to a Philistine city. And then look what happens. He goes back east all the way down to the other side of the Jordan River. Number 4, in a place called Mitzpeh. And number 5, he goes from Moab, another enemy, back up to Israel and to Keilah, and he's continuously running and running and running. In fact, what does it say? There are 12 different places that he runs to. And I think that this gives us pause. Because remember, David was anointed by Samuel to become the king. He is the king. And yet he's a king incognito. He's a king that no one knows about it. And the only person who does is Jonathan, his friend, and his family. And everyone else seems to want him dead. Now, there are some people that he meets who don't know the whole drama that's taking place here, but they quickly find out. So I want to give you this perspective to see, King Saul is like this manic depressive kind of king who is still fighting with the Philistines, still fighting with the Moabites, but at the same time is dedicating his energy on trying to defeat David and kill him. David, what's he doing? He's running. Now, what's interesting, and maybe we'll take a look at this at another time, is that while he's running, he's also writing the Psalms. Because we have certain Psalms with the title, When I Was Hiding in the Cave from Saul. So we understand that David, what's amazing about his personality is that he is multi-valenced. He has many different aspects to his personality. On the one hand, he's a spiritual man. On the other hand, he plays an instrument, and he's a warrior, and he was a shepherd, and he's small, and he defeats Goliath. And at the same time, he is also a writer of psalms, of poems to God, expressing his innermost feelings to God at every step of the way. This makes him a unique character. With this introduction, we begin chapter 21. And David then went his way, and Jonathan returned to the town. Remember the previous chapter, it seemed like this was the last time David and Jonathan could meet. And they had a very heartwarming and saddening last meeting where they realized that Jonathan is beholden to his father, and that's how he is until his dying day, and we'll learn about that. Whereas David and their blood brothers, so close, David has to run away. Jonathan cannot convince his father, so David runs. You have to think about this, and we'll talk about this, because where's he going to run to? So the answer is, the first place he runs to is a place called Nov. What's in Nov? The priest. In fact, it's a city of priests. Why does David run to Nov? We'll find out, perhaps. On one level, he's just running, and wherever he gets to, he's looking for food. He's looking for help. He's looking for friends. On the other hand, was he looking for, spirituality? If he's going to a city of priests, the city of Nob, perhaps. But what's strange here is that the king of Nob doesn't understand. This is in front of me, standing the one who slew Goliath. And he trembles and he says, why are you alone? Why do you not have an entourage with you? And David answers the priest, lying. Okay, so here he's lying because he doesn't want to get everyone involved in the politics, because maybe some people are beholden to Saul, and he's going to say to them, oh, I'm running away from Saul, and they'll turn him in. Therefore, what David does is say, oh, the king ordered me on a special mission that no one can know about. And I've directed my men, who are supposedly, the king's courtiers in my entourage, ahead to such and such a place. Basically, David is trying to survive here. And he says, now, do you have any loaves of bread? Can you imagine? This is the lot of David. This will happen once again in his life, remarkably, after he is king and celebrated by all, but he has to run away and he's on his own. But right now, he's truly on his own. In fact, the prophet Samuel has left him. His best friend Jonathan has left him. His family is hiding out, because anyone connected to David should be killed. David is on his own. The priest then says to David, I don't really have ordinary bread. The priest has special bread that was called truma that he received, but it was holy. And that's really just for the priest alone. The people who are impure shouldn't have it. And he said there's only consecrated bread, only special bread that have to be kept away from women who are impure. The priest says, it's a detailed story, it doesn't make a difference. In verse 7, the priest gave him the consecrated bread, because there was none there except for the bread of display, which had been removed from the presence of the Lord to be replaced by warm bread as soon as it's taken away. Now, I guess the Navi wants to tell us that David is in such dire straits that he convinces the priest that he needs to eat the bread, even if it is bread that's supposed to be used for spiritual reasons, and only that's consecrated, that's holy bread. He's basically saying, help me. Now, one of Saul's officials was there that day. And his name was Doeg. And the Navi is telling us that we're going to learn a little more about this guy named Doeg, the Edomite. Okay? David said to Ahimelech, who was the king, head priest, haven't you got a spear or a sword for me? Can you imagine? David had to run away. He doesn't have any sword to defend himself. So the priest says, there is one sword in this town. Remember, it's a town of priests. So there are no swords. There's no place for warfare in a town that's dedicated to God and the temple. They said, "What? We do have one sword, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine whom you slew. It's over there wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take that one, but there's nothing left of them that one." Now, if we remember, I don't know how David wielded the sword. I don't know how he carried it, right? David's a small guy, and Goliath was this giant, and his sword must have been gigantic. But what did David have? He has no choice. He said, "There's none like it, give it to me." And that day, David continued on his flight from Saul. Okay, that's stage one. So stage one is he goes to a place called Nob. He has a conversation. Here's Nob, okay? He has a conversation with the king, with the priest. He asks for some bread. He asks for a sword. And he takes all of that and he travels west. Where does he end up? In a place called Gat. Now, you might say, okay, that's fine, except that's not fine. He goes to the mortal enemy. The Philistines are the enemies of the Israelites. Wouldn't David have been killed? David makes a calculation. He says, I am basically going to be hunted down anywhere in Israel because the king is powerful and he has tentacles throughout the land and he wants me dead, and therefore I have no solace, that I have no respite. But you know where I'm safe? I'm safe in Gat. Gat is the Philistine stronghold. It's a city of Philistines. Now, how does he survive Gat? How do they not kill him when they realize he's the one who slew Goliath? So this is a strategic gamble. Is he going to be murdered, killed immediately? After all, by the way, he has the sword of Goliath. And Goliath was from Gat. So, nevertheless, in verse 11, he came to the king Achish of Gat. Obviously, why did he go to the king? Because when he's walking there and the guards see him, they immediately understand what's going on and they bring him to the king. Should we kill him? What should we do to him? And they said, that's David, king of the land. Now, I think that they mean king of the land, that he was like so great. That he slew Goliath. That's the one of whom they sing a dance. Saul slain but his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Now, when David heard that, he knew he was about to be killed. After all, he killed Philistines. So he had to react very, very quickly to figure out how he's going to survive. So what does he do? He feigned madness for their benefit. He scratched marks on the doors of the gate and let his saliva run down his beard. This is like right out of a thriller, you know? You can imagine that the king is undercover, running David, and he's running away, and he's already killed Goliath, and Saul is on his trail. And he gets the king of Achish of Gat, and he decides that he's going to act insane. And he figures if he acts insane, then they're not going to kill him. They're not going to see him as a threat. And his gamble pays off. Achish said to his courtiers, you see, this man is a raving lunatic. Why bring him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this one? Now, in Hebrew, it's chasar mishugaim ani. It's a very famous quote, which means, don't I have enough crazy people that you brought another crazy person to me? Now, I think that David went to God thinking that he would say to him, listen, right now, okay, let's put our enmity, our being enemies aside, because your enemy is Saul and he's my enemy because he wants to kill me, so we can work together. But when he got there and they realized, and they started talking about how he killed all these Philistines, he changed his tactic and he started to act like a crazy person. And that was enough for King Achish to say, he's crazy, send him on his way. So he survives, but he doesn't get what he's seeking, which was a place to stay. So in chapter 22, Vayelech David, Misham, and David departs there and escapes to the cave of Adullam. We have our picture here, and you see Gat to Adullam, okay? And his family is supposed to be in this area, in the heart, by Bethlehem, by Hebron, Bethlehem, in the center of Judah. But they had escaped and sought refuge in all the way on the other side, as we'll see. So David now is running. He ran west, and now he's running back east. Chapter 22, David runs to Adullam, and his brothers and his father's house heard, and they came to him. Okay? So which means that he sent word to his family that I'm in a safe place, in a cave in Adullam. Don't worry about Saul. Let's meet up and let's figure out what the next step is. Now, everyone who was in straits, which means people who were in trouble, people who were not in good stead, people who were kind of running away from the law, perhaps, okay? People who were in debt, people who were desperate, they joined him. And all of a sudden, he became the leader with 400 men. This is totally understandable. I mean, you have, someone who's being chased away by Saul, so who kind of attaches themselves to this type of person? People who themselves are running away from Saul. People themselves are on the bit of the underbelly, are murky individuals. But they form a little army. They have 400 men. Where does he go from there? He goes to Moab, another enemy of Israel. He goes to modern-day Jordan, okay? He goes all the way east, crosses the Jordan River, brings his family, his parents, to Moab. And Moab, the king of Moab, says, you can stay here. Now, I wonder, why would Moab say that they can stay here? Perhaps the Navi doesn't tell us, okay? Perhaps, David reminded the king of Moab who David's great-great-grandmother was. If we know the story, David's great-great-grandmother was none other than Ruth the Moabite. Ruth, who converted to Judaism, was from Moab. According to the rabbinic midrash, she was from a family of the king. In which case, it would make sense that when David went to Moab, he wasn't an enemy; he was actually a relative. So he brings his family, who were also connected, and therefore he is able to keep his family there in Moab, and they're safe. So David thought, well, maybe I'll stay with them in the Mitzudah, which is in the fortress. There's a fortress in Moab where David's family was. And then we are introduced to, in verse 5, the prophet Gad. He said to David, do not stay in the stronghold. Go at once to the territory of Judah. And David listened to him. What is this teaching us? This is teaching us that David has a prophet with him. And throughout his life, there's the two prophets, God, the prophet, and Natan, the prophet, and he is in constant contact with them, reminding us once again that David is in contact with God throughout his travels and travails, his hard, difficult times. They said, go, the prophet didn't explain, but it says, you shouldn't be here. You should be in the city of, in the territory of Judah. And that's where David left, and he went there. Now, the camera shifts from David back to Saul. And Saul hears that David and the men had been located. And Saul was in Giv'ah, where he was living, or his castle was, or his fortress. And Saul said to the people, listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give fields and vineyards to every one of you? He kind of got a sense that, the people are starting to rally around David, at least in a quiet way. So he said, you think that David is going to give you fields? You think that David is going to take care of you? Will he make you all captains and ministers and heads of armies? Is that why all of you have conspired against me? For no one informs me when my own son makes a pact with the son of Jesse. No one is concerned for me. No one informs me when my own son has set my servant an ambush against me, and as is now the case. Now, obviously, the kingdom is a small place. People talk. They found out that Jonathan was colluding or connecting or keeping secrets with David. Now, interestingly, Saul never confronts Jonathan about it. Their bond is actually very admirable, and it's something to think about as a message, despite the fact that Saul was crazy, and despite the fact that Saul's son was a traitor. He nevertheless doesn't. He did throw that sword at him once, but aside from that, he doesn't approach him about it. But all the rest of the people, he's saying, I'm indicting you. Why did you not listen to me? And then we remember we met a guy named Doeg the Edomite. Now we read him again, verse 9. He was standing among one of the ministers or the servants of Saul, and he spoke up and he said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Achimelech at Nob. Remember it said that Doeg was there? We don't know why Doeg was there. According to the Midrash, Doeg actually had a positive relationship with David at the time, but now he turns on him. He inquired of the Lord on his behalf and gave him provisions. He's telling you what the people, the king, the priest of Achimelech did. And he said he gave him bread, and he gave him provisions, and he gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Now the king sent for the priest Achimelech, and the priests belonging to his father's house. And they all came to the king. Saul said, listen to me, son of Achitub. Yes, my lord. Why have you and the son of Jesse conspired against me? Now, this blindsided Achimelech. He didn't know anything about it. Not the whole kingdom didn't know that Saul wanted to murder David. Here are the facts that they knew. David worked for Saul. David soothed Saul with his plague, and he also served Saul by killing Goliath. So why should Achimelech have assumed that David was an enemy? But in Saul's crazy mind, that's what happened. Achimelech replies in verse 14, but who's there among all your courtiers as trusted as David, son-in-law of your majesty, and obedient to your bidding, and esteemed in your household? And he also says, I've not done no wrong. What have I done? This is what was expected of me. He said to me, I'm here on, being sent by King Saul, and I gave him whatever I needed to do. Well, Saul was not interested. Verse 16, but the king said, you shall die, Achimelech, you and all your father's house. The kings demanded his guards, turn about and kill the priests of the Lord, for they are in league with David. They knew he was running away and they did not inform me. But the king's servants would not raise a hand to strike down the priests of the Lord. After all, you don't go killing the priests. That's a very, very dangerous thing, and you don't want to mess with the priests of God. The high priest, you're going to go. You're going to go and you're going to kill him in his priestly vestments. All of the guards put their swords down. The priest felt pretty good of himself. Until in verse 18, he says to Doeg, hey, Doeg, you go and kill the priests. And Doeg the Edomite went and struck down the priests himself. And that day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod, 85 priests of Nob. He put Nob, the town of the priests, to the sword. Men, women, children, infants, oxen, asses, sheep, all to the sword. But one son of Achimelech, his name was Eviatar, he escaped and he fled to David. Now, think about this. David runs for shelter, innocently asking for some bread. And then Eviatar comes back to David and said, my entire family and all 85 were murdered by King Saul because they had contact with you. How does David feel? How could David possibly feel? It's such a frightening thought. And the Navi tells us, when Eviatar told David that Saul had killed the priests, David said to Eviatar, I knew that day when Doeg was there that he would tell Saul, I'm to blame for all the deaths in your father's house. This is one of, if I had a marker, I would circle this verse. David is responsible. He accepts the responsibility, he accepts and understands that you can make all the excuses and say, no, what are you talking about? He didn't know and he didn't have and he couldn't have expected. And he says, no, it stops with me. I realize. And he's going to obviously make amends with Doeg, him or his son. At some point, he's going to not make amends. He's going to take vengeance on him. But just the ability to stand up and to say, and to, I guess, cry out, what have I done? I'm responsible for this. And there's one son that remains, who's the priest. Comes along David, and he says, I will take responsibility for you. I will take care of you. Stay with me. Do not be afraid. For whoever seeks your life must seek my life also. It will be my care to guard you. Now, this ends our 2 chapters, and they're very, very fraught with drama. And it's an exciting story, but a very sad story. You can obviously understand that this is not going to end up in a positive way. There's already death all around. And when there's a crazy king, crazy leaders have opportunistic employees. And when there's a chance for opportunity, then people are willing to bend their morality. Yeah, I'm willing to, to ignore this immorality because, after all, I'm working for the king, and you think the king is insane. Yes, but, in order to advance my career, I'm willing to take that step. A very, very frightening moment. And David is gathering this information in his head and understanding that every move of his will have dire, dire consequences for all those around him. And he has to make that decision. What is he going to do, and how is he going to confront, how's he going to live, and how is he going to lead? And for this, to understand what happens next, we will wait to the next installment next week. Everybody have a wonderful week, and thank you for joining the class.
Thanks. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.